I'm Gordon Blake, 45 years old, and for the past 17 years, I've been the Senior IT Systems Architect at Cleveland Tech Solutions. It's a role I took immense pride in, a career built on precision, reliability, and deep technical knowledge. Over nearly 2 decades, I designed and maintained the company's critical infrastructure, systems supporting an impressive $85 million in annual revenue. Behind the scenes, I crafted secure, scalable networks and ensured uptime that our clients counted on, often without realizing the complexity underpinning their daily operations. I was known among my colleagues as someone who delivered quietly but consistently. My work wasn't flashy, and I never sought the spotlight. Instead, I focused on the details others overlooked, the interlocking pieces of hardware and software that make a company's backbone strong and resilient. My job was to anticipate failures before they happened, and to create solutions that kept the business running smoothly. For years, I was that unseen constant, the professional who made sure everything worked day after day. That quiet reliability made it all the more shocking when, on an otherwise ordinary Wednesday, I was summoned by Karen Mitchell, the HR director. Her office was down the hall, a place I usually avoided unless necessary. At exactly noon, I received a curt call. "Gordon, can you come in for a quick meeting?" I suspected nothing out of the ordinary at first. Our company, like many, had been navigating some financial pressures, but I had been reassured by recent project successes and positive performance reviews. So I walked into her office expecting maybe a routine HR update or to discuss some minor administrative detail. What I wasn't prepared for was the cold announcement she delivered with clinical efficiency. "We're laying you off effective immediately." The words hit me like a physical blow. Though my face betrayed nothing, I kept my tone professional, asking for clarification, but she was firm, citing restructuring and budget realignment as rationale. No warning, no transition plan, no severance offer mentioned initially, just a directive to clear my desk by day's end. I knew the suddenness was intentional, a way to cut costs quickly without room for negotiation. After the meeting, I returned to my workstation, stunned but composed. I methodically saved my work, encrypted backups of proprietary system maps, and made notes of the conversation for my personal records. Maintaining control was crucial. My years in IT taught me that panic never solved anything. Instead, I focused on what I could document, what facts I could preserve. This wasn't just about losing a job. It was about protecting my professional legacy and financial security. By evening, the impact hit home more personally. My wife's quiet words, "Pack up your things," echoed the harsh reality. We had to prepare for the uncertainty ahead, uncertain how long I'd be without income, or how this abrupt severance might affect our future plans. The stability I had built over nearly 2 decades suddenly felt fragile. Later that night, unable to shake the weight of the day, I found myself at a small diner in downtown Cleveland. The fluorescent lights cast a cold glow over the counter where I sat alone, trying to gather my thoughts. The hum of conversations around me seemed distant, almost irrelevant. I was focused inward, running through what had just happened, what it meant, and what steps I needed to take next. That's when an old man, seemingly out of nowhere, gently touched my arm. His eyes were kind yet piercing as he leaned in and said 5 words I'll never forget. "You look like Michael, my son." It was a moment that stopped me cold, distracting me from despair, and planting a seed of something unexpected, a connection that would soon change the trajectory of my story. In that brief encounter, amidst the personal and professional upheaval, I recognized that even the darkest moments sometimes carry hints of hope or opportunity. But for now, the immediate challenge was clear: to understand the betrayal I had just experienced, analyze the ramifications, and begin the painstaking work of rebuilding from the ground up. 17 years at Cleveland Tech Solutions gave me more than just tenure. It built a foundation of technical expertise and professional discipline that few could match. When I reflect on my career, what stands out is the tangible impact of the systems I engineered. Structures that didn't just run but thrived, generating millions in savings and supporting critical business functions seamlessly. For instance, one of my hallmark projects was the comprehensive system upgrade I led during the company's expansion 5 years ago. That initiative involved overhauling legacy hardware and software, integrating new virtualization technologies, and optimizing network throughput. The result? an estimated annual savings of $2.3 million in operational costs alone. This wasn't just a numbers game. It was about creating a resilient infrastructure that scaled with business growth, all while minimizing downtime and ensuring data integrity. Additionally, I orchestrated the secure migration of 150 servers from on-premises data centers to a hybrid cloud environment, a complex project demanding meticulous planning and flawless execution. Each server had unique configurations, dependencies, and compliance requirements. The migration had to be flawless. Any misstep could disrupt services for hundreds of clients, some of whom relied on our systems for mission-critical operations. I personally developed the migration protocols, created detailed system maps reflecting every node, script, and access point, and supervised the entire process. The project concluded ahead of schedule, without a single outage beyond a planned maintenance window, solidifying the company's reputation for reliability. Maintaining 99.99% uptime across all systems wasn't merely a goal, it was a professional standard I held myself to. This demanded constant vigilance, proactive monitoring, and a deep understanding of every component, from firewalls and load balancers to database clusters and backup routines. I designed automated alert systems and failover protocols that allowed us to anticipate and counteract potential system failures before they could impact operations. Colleagues often remarked that I was the quiet sentinel of the company's IT infrastructure, always working behind the scenes to protect business continuity. Throughout my tenure, I was promoted 3 times, each advancement reflecting recognition of my technical contributions and leadership in complex projects. At the time of my layoff, my base salary was $140,000 annually, supplemented by vested stock options valued at $118,000. These stock options were more than financial perks. They represented acknowledgement of my sustained contribution and alignment with company success. I had invested as much in understanding the company's strategic goals as in its technical execution, and these benefits formed a key part of my professional security. Another critical factor in my professional value was the exhaustive documentation I maintained. Every system upgrade, every patch, every change request was logged meticulously, complete with version histories, rationale, risk assessments, and rollback plans. Beyond project documents, I maintained encrypted backups of system architecture diagrams, network schematics, and scripts stored in secure repositories. This documentation wasn't just for compliance or internal reviews. It was a strategic asset, ensuring knowledge continuity and mitigating risks associated with staff changes or unexpected incidents. My client relationships also added another layer of professional value. Over the years, I had developed a nuanced understanding of client workflows and tailored system responses to meet their evolving needs. I regularly consulted with key clients to preemptively address potential issues and incorporated their feedback into system designs. This rapport not only improved service delivery, but also built trust, reinforcing the company's competitive position. Ironically, all these qualities that made me invaluable also made me a prime target during the company's cost-cutting measures. Senior employees with extensive tenure, high salaries, and vested benefits were the first to be considered expendable. The assumption, perhaps naive on their part, was that such employees could be replaced swiftly without jeopardizing system integrity or client satisfaction. They underestimated the depth of institutional knowledge embedded in my role and the strategic foresight I employed in safeguarding company assets. Looking back, it's clear how my professional discipline, the rigorous documentation, the strategic planning, and the client-centric approach would become vital tools in the unfolding battle ahead. This wasn't just about losing a job abruptly. It was about protecting the professional legacy painstakingly built over nearly 2 decades. Each project I led, every system diagram I drew, and all the records I kept were part of a larger framework of accountability and security, a framework I would soon rely on heavily. Karen Mitchell was the human face of the company's cost-cutting mandate, but behind her polished exterior was a pressure cooker of executive demands and financial targets. The board had issued a directive to reduce operational expenses aggressively, with a laser focus on trimming the senior payroll. Karen, as HR director, was tasked with executing these layoffs under tight deadlines, and her approach was clinical, dispassionate, and entirely strategic. It wasn't about personal grievances or office politics. It was a calculated move to replace high-cost, long-tenured employees with entry-level hires whose compensation packages were substantially lower. From my vantage point, Karen's plan was clear. Remove the senior architects and engineers who commanded significant salaries and carried vested stock options that translated into substantial future payouts. She zeroed in on employees like me, whose compensation structure included not just a $140,000 salary, but also nearly $118,000 in vested options, benefits that threatened to weigh heavily on the company's short-term financial reports. Eliminating our roles seemed like an immediate cost-saving measure, but it was a short-sighted strategy, ignoring the intangible and critical value embedded in our expertise. Karen's replacement choice was Mark Reynolds, a junior systems administrator with minimal experience and a salary offer just under $65,000. The financial rationale for this swap seemed straightforward to her: halve the salary expenditure and avoid paying severance or honoring vested stock options by pressing for immediate termination without negotiation. However, this plan neglected fundamental realities about the systems I had architected and maintained over nearly 2 decades: complex infrastructure with layers of access credentials, custom scripts, and security protocols that only I fully understood. What Karen failed to appreciate was the strategic oversight in her execution. I had documented every system dependency and maintained encrypted backups of critical system maps and passwords, but more importantly, certain non-compete clauses tied directly to severance packages created legal leverage. These clauses required the company to honor severance only if I agreed to specific post-employment restrictions. By attempting to force an immediate layoff without severance, Karen inadvertently activated contractual protections rather than circumventing them. It was a nuanced but vital point, one that she overlooked amid the rush to cut costs. Additionally, Karen underestimated the technical risk embedded in this transition. The company's entire IT infrastructure depended heavily on knowledge and access controls that were not yet transferred or properly documented for the new hire. Mark lacked the institutional knowledge and experience to manage system intricacies, including emergency protocols and compliance audits, which were crucial for maintaining client trust and regulatory adherence. Frank Donovan, a retired IT consultant and my mentor for over a decade, immediately recognized this vulnerability. Upon hearing of my layoff, Frank reached out to offer not just moral support, but a strategic perspective on both the technical and legal implications of the company's approach. Frank's insights were invaluable. He reminded me that the company's neglect of established handover procedures and failure to involve experienced staff in the transition process exposed them to intellectual property risks and operational disruption. Frank's experience with similar corporate restructurings underscored that the company was not only breaching contractual obligations, but also exposing itself to potential regulatory investigation. This dual threat, legal and technical, was a leverage point I hadn't fully considered before. It reframed my layoff not as an isolated personal loss, but as a breach with wider ramifications. Meanwhile, Karen pressed forward, apparently unaware of the consequences her plan invited. The layoff notice I received was abrupt, omitting any mention of severance and denying the recognition of vested stock options. Internal communications later leaked, revealing not only timelines for my replacement by Mark within 48 hours, but also a calculated attempt to minimize documentation that might trigger contractual or regulatory scrutiny. It was clear Karen intended to fast-track this transition to avoid delays, assuming the company's legal position was solid enough to withstand any challenge. But my meticulous record-keeping, combined with Frank's strategic advice, revealed otherwise. The documents I had carefully preserved, including employment contracts with explicit severance and stock vesting conditions, non-compete agreements, and correspondence about my role's critical system access, formed a robust foundation for contesting the layoff. More importantly, the technical documentation illustrated how my sudden removal without proper transition risked system failures and intellectual property loss, a scenario that would reflect poorly on the company's fiduciary responsibilities and operational governance. In this context, Karen's actions began to look less like a sound business decision and more like a reckless gambit driven by short-term cost objectives. She misjudged the complexity of the systems and the enforceability of contractual protections. More critically, she underestimated my ability to leverage both legal frameworks and technical documentation in mounting a professional response. This miscalculation would prove to be a turning point. It highlighted the inherent tension between corporate cost-cutting imperatives and the value of institutional knowledge embedded in senior employees. As I absorbed this reality, I resolved to approach the situation not with frustration or anger, but with methodical professionalism. This was a battle of documentation, contracts, and system knowledge, and I had every tool I needed. Karen's oversight of the non-compete clauses and her failure to account for my uniquely controlled system access points set the stage for a strategic response. And with Frank Donovan's mentorship guiding me, I began to outline a multi-pronged approach that would combine legal action with technical scrutiny. This phase was critical. Understanding Karen's motivation and missteps gave me clarity on where to apply pressure. It wasn't simply about reclaiming what I'd lost. It was about enforcing accountability in a corporate environment that had recklessly undervalued its senior technical staff. The interplay between cost-cutting measures and contractual protections was complex but navigable, and with a calm, evidence-driven approach, I was prepared to turn these vulnerabilities to my advantage, setting a course for professional restoration. After the initial shock of being laid off, my first priority was to carefully review every document the company had handed me, or rather, thrust at me, during that rushed noon meeting with Karen Mitchell. The termination packet was thin and oddly incomplete, which only raised immediate red flags. As a seasoned professional, I knew these packets were supposed to include detailed information about severance packages, benefit continuation, stock option status, and any post-employment obligations like non-compete agreements. What I found was far from standard and far from fair. First, the severance details were conspicuously missing. There was no mention of any compensation beyond my final paycheck. My contract, which I retrieved from my personal archives to cross-reference, explicitly included a severance clause offering 6 months' salary in the event of involuntary termination, unrelated to gross misconduct. The omission was deliberate. It was obvious the company was trying to avoid honoring that commitment, likely to cut immediate costs. That raised a legal issue: wrongful termination without severance, as outlined in the employment agreement. Next, I examined the stock option documentation. I had $118,000 in vested options, accrued over years of consistent performance. The termination notice stated abruptly that I was forfeiting all stock options due to voluntary resignation, a classification I categorically disputed. The paperwork reflected that I had been terminated, not that I resigned. This mischaracterization appeared designed to deny me the benefit of my accrued equity, a move that contravened the vesting and exercise terms clearly spelled out in the company's equity plan. My careful records confirmed that vested options were to be retained or exercised within a defined post-termination window, not revoked outright. This was another discrepancy that demanded challenge. Then there was the non-compete clause, very troubling in its presentation. I had signed one upon joining the company, as was standard, but it was tightly linked to severance eligibility. The clause restricted client solicitation and employment with direct competitors for 1 year after termination, but only if severance was accepted. The termination packet included a hastily prepared document asking me to sign a new non-compete agreement immediately, with language far more restrictive and presented without any consultation or negotiation. The timing was suspicious. Forcing me to sign under duress without severance consideration was intended to strip me of both my financial rights and my freedom to leverage my expertise elsewhere. This was a potential breach of contract on their part, and a coercive tactic I was unwilling to accept. Beyond the paperwork, I uncovered internal company emails from a confidential source that leaked through a trusted colleague. These messages, timestamped within 48 hours prior to my layoff, detailed plans to replace me with a much less experienced technician, Mark Reynolds, at a salary barely half mine. The emails discussed expediting my removal to avoid severance payout and eliminating my access to critical system documentation. Evidently, the company was deliberately minimizing the transition window, almost ignoring the risks involved. I was struck by the sheer recklessness of such an approach, given the sensitive systems I had designed and maintained. The system architecture itself was another critical piece of the puzzle. I revisited my encrypted backups, containing detailed network schematics, server configurations, access credentials, and automation scripts, documents and data sets that only I fully understood due to years of hands-on stewardship. There were passwords, encrypted keys, and proprietary scripts controlling automated failover and recovery mechanisms that had never been properly documented for general staff. My exit left gaping holes in operational continuity. The new hire would be left navigating a complex infrastructure without a map, a recipe for failure and potential security breaches. Notably, the company had also neglected to include or request a formal knowledge transfer or system handover plan as part of my exit process. This omission was glaring and non-compliant with best practices for IT governance and risk management. I realized that without proper transition, critical systems were vulnerable to outages and data loss, exposing the company to regulatory risks and client dissatisfaction. This was not just a personnel issue, it was an operational crisis waiting to happen. Throughout this review, I maintained a professional detachment, no room for emotional reaction. Instead, I conducted a cold, methodical analysis of the leverage points that would form the foundation of any response. The breach of contract regarding severance and stock options was a clear violation of both the employment agreement and Ohio labor laws. The coercive tactics around the non-compete clause constituted undue pressure that might invalidate their enforceability. The internal communications proved premeditation and bad faith, and the systemic risk posed by abrupt knowledge loss created a potential liability for the company, threatening their fiduciary duties to clients and stakeholders. I documented every inconsistency meticulously, compiling a comprehensive dossier. This included scanned copies of my original employment contract, the termination packet, the hastily signed non-compete, the leaked emails, and screenshots of system diagrams and encrypted files, proving sole custodianship of critical infrastructure knowledge. Each item was annotated with dates, sources, and context to ensure clarity and evidentiary value. This process crystallized my understanding. Karen Mitchell's approach was legally vulnerable and operationally dangerous. The company had gambled on my silence and swift exit, dismissing the contractual protections I was entitled to and the technical knowledge only I possessed. Their failure to respect these elements positioned me not as a disadvantaged victim, but as a professional with documented leverage in a complex legal and technical dispute. With this cold assessment complete, I was ready to move on to the next phase, planning a systematic response to these violations, leveraging both legal counsel and technical expertise. The foundation was solid, built on facts, contracts, and undeniable operational risks. The challenge ahead was to translate these findings into actionable steps that would protect my rights and hold the company accountable. After thoroughly dissecting every document related to my termination, I understood that acting alone would limit my effectiveness. This was a complex legal and technical situation requiring expertise beyond my own. Recognizing this, I promptly scheduled a consultation with Lisa Harmon, a seasoned employment attorney, recommended by a trusted colleague. Lisa was known for her meticulous approach to wrongful termination and contract disputes, precisely the kind of legal acumen I needed to navigate these waters. In preparation for our meeting, I undertook a rigorous organizational process to compile all relevant materials. I created a detailed chronological dossier that included my original employment contract, severance agreements, stock option plans, correspondence with HR, the termination packet, and the hastily drafted non-compete addendum. Each document was carefully scanned and cross-referenced with my personal annotations. To ensure clarity, I arranged the paperwork in a timeline format, highlighting key dates, conversations, and contractual clauses. This methodical approach was essential not only for my own understanding, but to provide Lisa with a coherent narrative supported by hard evidence. Next, I incorporated internal communications into the dossier. The leaked emails revealing the company's plans to replace me with Mark Reynolds within 48 hours were critical. These emails exposed not only the intent to circumvent severance obligations, but also the deliberate exclusion of proper transition protocols. I flagged conversations where Karen Mitchell explicitly directed minimal overlap between my tenure and Mark's onboarding. This pointed to premeditation and bad faith on the company's part, details that could strengthen a wrongful termination claim. On the technical front, I compiled system architecture diagrams, network schematics, and encrypted backups of critical scripts and passwords. This was the proprietary knowledge I had cultivated over nearly 2 decades, and none of it had been formally transferred or documented for the incoming technician. I included detailed notes explaining the operational dependencies and risks associated with this knowledge gap. This technical evidence was crucial to demonstrate how the company's abrupt termination plan jeopardized system integrity and client service continuity. I also gathered witness statements from trusted colleagues who were aware of the layoff's timing, rationale, and procedural irregularities. These statements were carefully documented, capturing their observations of Karen's handling of the situation and the lack of standard transition measures. These testimonies added a human dimension to the otherwise dry contractual and technical evidence, reinforcing the overall case. Throughout this preparation phase, I relied heavily on my experience in project management and documentation discipline. Every piece of evidence was logged with metadata, date of acquisition, source, and contextual notes. I used encrypted cloud storage to safeguard digital files, ensuring confidentiality and integrity. Physical documents were stored in a secure folder, carefully organized for quick reference. Frank Donovan played an instrumental role during this stage. Beyond moral support, he reviewed my technical documentation and advised on identifying system vulnerabilities that could be strategically emphasized. Frank's decades of consulting experience helped me understand which technical points would resonate most strongly in a legal context, such as the risk of unauthorized access, potential data loss, and compliance failures. He also cautioned me about the importance of maintaining professional composure and clarity in all communications with the company and legal representatives. One critical insight from Frank pertained to the non-compete clause tied to severance eligibility. Karen had failed to consider that any severance denial without valid cause would render the new restrictive non-compete agreement unenforceable. This vulnerability was a leverage point I intended to exploit. By refusing to sign the imposed agreement under duress and documenting all correspondence, I preserved my rights to challenge the company's tactics. I also devised an internal timeline, aligning my contractual rights with the company's procedural lapses. This timeline included deadlines for severance payment, exercise windows for stock options, and notification requirements under Ohio employment law. By overlaying these with the company's documented actions, I could pinpoint exact breaches and regulatory violations that would form the basis of legal complaints. As the date of my consultation with Lisa approached, I rehearsed my presentation, summarizing the facts succinctly, emphasizing documented breaches, and outlining anticipated technical risks due to the rushed transition. The goal was to provide Lisa with a clear, evidence-backed foundation for immediate action. Lisa's initial reactions during our meeting confirmed the strength of the case. She highlighted the multiple layers of contractual non-compliance and the company's potential exposure to both civil litigation and regulatory penalties. We discussed next steps: filing formal complaints, preserving evidence integrity, and preparing for negotiations or litigation. Lisa also advised me on professional conduct during this period, emphasizing the importance of controlled communication, avoiding emotional responses, and continuing to document every interaction. Simultaneously, I began securing encrypted backups of all system files, including scripts and passwords, on isolated drives inaccessible to company IT. This precaution safeguarded my proprietary work from potential tampering or deletion, ensuring I retained full copies for legal and potential consulting purposes. I also digitized and catalogued all email correspondence with Karen and other HR personnel, preserving metadata to verify authenticity. Further, I collected statements from colleagues who could attest to the company's disregard for proper layoff procedures and the absence of knowledge transfer, details critical for substantiating claims of operational negligence. These statements were notarized and time-stamped where possible, increasing their evidentiary weight. Throughout this process, I maintained a steady professional demeanor. I responded promptly and precisely to company inquiries, avoiding speculation or emotional commentary. I carefully logged every conversation, email, and meeting, reinforcing a pattern of organized, factual communication. Internally, I reflected on Karen's critical oversights, the way she ignored severance-linked non-compete clauses, underestimated the complexity of system access controls, and failed to anticipate legal and operational repercussions. Her approach revealed a gap between corporate cost-cutting expediency and the realities of technical stewardship and contractual law. With all preparations complete, I was positioned to transition from assessment to strategic action. The foundation was laid, legal counsel engaged, documentation comprehensive, technical vulnerabilities identified, and professional witness support secured. The path forward was clear. Leverage this multifaceted evidence to challenge the wrongful layoff, assert my contractual rights, and hold the company accountable for the operational risks they had recklessly introduced. This phase marked the pivot from personal shock to purposeful strategy. The battle was no longer abstract. It was grounded in facts, contracts, and a meticulously documented record of corporate missteps. With Frank's mentorship and Lisa's legal guidance, I was ready to execute a systematic professional response that balanced legal rigor with technical precision, setting the stage for the next critical phase of this unfolding challenge. When I first sat down with Lisa Harmon, I brought the entire dossier meticulously organized over the prior week. Each document, carefully annotated and cross-referenced, laid bare the company's contractual breaches and regulatory oversights. Lisa, a seasoned employment attorney with a reputation for cutting through corporate doublespeak, quickly identified several pivotal violations that would form the backbone of our legal strategy. Foremost among these was the clear case of wrongful termination without proper severance. My original employment agreement explicitly guaranteed 6 months of severance pay in the event of an involuntary layoff not tied to misconduct. The termination packet, however, contained no severance offer whatsoever. Worse, the company reclassified my termination as a resignation, a blatant mischaracterization designed to deny me my rightful compensation. Lisa confirmed that under Ohio employment law, this was unlawful, an intentional attempt to circumvent contractual obligations. This finding alone provided strong grounds for a wrongful termination claim. Next, we dissected the stock option agreement. Despite my vested options amounting to $118,000, the termination notice labeled my departure as voluntary resignation to justify forfeiture of these accrued benefits. I presented Lisa with the company's equity plan documentation, which clearly stated that vested options should be retained and exercisable for a defined period post-termination unless terminated for cause. The absence of any misconduct on my part meant the company had no legal basis to invalidate my stock options. Lisa noted this breach not only contravened the contract, but could also expose the company to damages for willful deprivation of earned equity. The non-compete clause presented a more nuanced challenge. The one I originally signed was linked explicitly to severance eligibility, restricting client solicitation and competitive employment only if severance was accepted. However, the company's HR department rushed a new, far more restrictive non-compete agreement for me to sign immediately upon termination, without severance and under duress. Lisa explained that this coercive tactic likely rendered the new non-compete unenforceable. Since the severance was never offered, forcing me to sign a restrictive agreement to forfeit additional rights was legally questionable. This insight proved critical. It meant the company's attempt to limit my future employment options might be invalid, strengthening my negotiating position. Beyond contractual issues, Lisa and I carefully reviewed the internal email trail I had uncovered. These communications exposed a premeditated plan to replace me within 48 hours with Mark Reynolds, a junior hire lacking the requisite skills or system knowledge. The emails explicitly acknowledged the intent to fast-track my removal to avoid severance obligations and minimize knowledge transfer. Lisa emphasized that this demonstrated bad faith and potential violations of fiduciary duty, which could be key in regulatory complaints. On the technical front, the system architecture diagrams and encrypted backups I brought to Lisa highlighted another dimension of the dispute: the operational risks the company knowingly exposed itself to by abruptly terminating me. These documents revealed that critical infrastructure components, proprietary scripts and secure access credentials were under my exclusive stewardship. The lack of a formal knowledge transfer or transition plan meant the company was flirting with potential system failures, breaches in regulatory compliance, and client service disruptions. Frank Donovan, my mentor and a retired IT consultant, had already helped identify these vulnerabilities, and I detailed these points to Lisa, who recognized their weight in demonstrating the company's negligence. Armed with this comprehensive evidence, Lisa began drafting formal regulatory complaints, citing multiple violations: breach of contract, wrongful termination practices, failure to honor stock option agreements, and neglect of fiduciary responsibilities tied to intellectual property and operational continuity. We also prepared to file claims under Ohio labor laws, highlighting the company's failure to comply with mandated severance and notification procedures. Parallel to this, Frank worked on documenting anticipated technical failures that could arise from the company's reckless transition plan. He compiled reports on potential system outages, security gaps, and compliance risks that were a direct consequence of my sudden departure without proper handover. These assessments provided expert testimony that would bolster our case by illustrating tangible damages beyond financial loss, something that would resonate strongly in court and regulatory reviews. Every piece of evidence was compiled with precision, contracts scanned with metadata intact, email threads archived with timestamps verified, system files secured on encrypted drives, and witness statements notarized and dated. The dossier was not just a collection of documents, but a strategic arsenal designed to withstand corporate legal defenses and regulatory scrutiny. Throughout this period, I maintained strict professionalism in all communications. Lisa reminded me that emotional responses or public statements could jeopardize the case, so I confined my exchanges with the company to written, factual correspondences, always retaining copies and logging every interaction. This disciplined approach reinforced the credibility of our position. Ultimately, Lisa's evaluation confirmed that Cleveland Tech Solutions had exposed itself to significant legal and regulatory risks by attempting to terminate me abruptly while circumventing contractual and statutory obligations. The evidence was not circumstantial, it was concrete and overwhelming. The company's missteps, misclassifying termination status, denying vested stock options, coercing non-compete agreements, ignoring operational knowledge transfer, and orchestrating a rushed, underqualified replacement, had created multiple avenues for legal challenge and leverage. This phase of building the legal and professional case was foundational. It transformed the raw facts of my layoff into a coherent narrative of breach, bad faith, and operational recklessness. With Lisa's guidance and Frank's technical expertise, I was poised to proceed to formal actions that would compel accountability and set the stage for reclaiming my rights and restoring professional standing. Once Lisa and I had finalized the legal groundwork and gathered every piece of evidence, it was time to move decisively. I knew the next steps had to be precise and professional, no room for missteps or emotional reactions. The objective was clear: notify Karen Mitchell and Cleveland Tech Solutions formally about their contractual and regulatory violations, initiate regulatory oversight, and strategically alert stakeholders whose interests might be at risk due to the company's reckless transition. First, I engaged Lisa to draft and serve detailed legal notices to both Karen personally and the company's corporate legal department. These notices meticulously itemized the breaches we had identified: wrongful termination without severance, illegal forfeiture of vested stock options, coercive non-compete tactics, and the failure to adhere to Ohio employment statutes governing layoffs. The language was firm but professional, laying out the facts with references to contract clauses, Ohio revised code sections, and potential consequences if ignored. This was not just about asserting rights. It was a calculated move to put the company on formal notice and document our position in the event of escalation. Simultaneously, we filed complaints with the Ohio Department of Commerce's Division of Labor and Industrial Relations. These complaints outlined the company's failure to provide severance per contract, misclassification of my termination status, and the coercive imposition of a restrictive non-compete agreement without consideration. Lisa guided me through the procedural steps, ensuring all submissions were timely and fully supported by our compiled evidence. Contracts, internal emails, witness affidavits, and documented system dependencies. Our aim was to trigger regulatory scrutiny that would complement the legal pressure and highlight fiduciary lapses in the company's handling of layoffs. Parallel to these formal actions, I identified key clients with whom I had long-standing professional relationships and whose operations depended heavily on the systems I had architected. I drafted carefully worded factual communications, alerting them to potential risks stemming from my abrupt departure and the insufficient transition process. The tone was neutral and professional, avoiding any accusations but emphasizing the importance of operational continuity and the heightened risk of service disruptions. These notifications were sent with copies to appropriate contacts within Cleveland Tech Solutions to maintain transparency and reinforce accountability. It was critical that these clients heard the concerns directly from someone with authoritative knowledge, ensuring they understood the potential impact without compromising confidentiality or breaching any non-disclosure agreements. To further protect my interests and maintain income stability during this turbulent period, I negotiated and secured a consulting contract with a reputable competitor firm. This arrangement not only provided financial security, but also positioned me as an active professional resource in the industry, indirectly signaling to Cleveland Tech Solutions that I was not sidelined, but continuing to contribute value elsewhere. The contract was carefully crafted to avoid conflicts with any legitimate non-compete obligations, based on Lisa's legal advice regarding the unenforceability of the coercive clause the company had tried to impose on me. This move was strategic, demonstrating professional resilience and readiness to re-engage under fair terms. Throughout this phase, I maintained a consistent, measured professional demeanor. Every response to company inquiries, whether from HR or legal counsel, was concise, fact-based, and unemotional. I refrained from engaging in informal discussions or negotiations without legal counsel present, preserving the integrity of my position. I documented every correspondence, emails, phone calls, meeting notes, logging dates, times, participants, and subject matter. This discipline ensured a clear chronological record that could be referenced in any formal proceedings. Internally, I also prepared transition documentation as requested, detailing system status reports, security protocols, and outstanding issues. This was not out of goodwill, but a calculated move to reinforce my professionalism and preclude any claims that I had obstructed the transition. By providing precise, factual information, I established a record that any subsequent operational problems could not be attributed to negligence on my part. Notably, Karen Mitchell remained unaware of the full extent of my legal and regulatory actions. She continued to push forward with Mark Reynolds' onboarding, seemingly confident the company's swift replacement strategy would succeed. This overconfidence was an advantage that I intended to leverage. The trap was set, not through rash retaliation, but through methodical, documented escalation, designed to expose the company's vulnerabilities in contract law, employment regulations, and system integrity. The cumulative effect of serving formal notices, filing regulatory complaints, alerting key clients, maintaining professional correspondence, and securing alternative consulting positioned me strategically. I had shifted from being a passive victim of abrupt layoff to an active agent asserting my rights and highlighting corporate mismanagement risks. While the company pressed on unaware, I was quietly orchestrating a systematic response that would soon ripple through their operations and legal standing. This stage was critical. It balanced assertive legal action with professional restraint, ensuring my case remained credible and strong. It also set the groundwork for the impending operational and legal consequences that would force Cleveland Tech Solutions to confront the repercussions of their reckless cost-cutting. The groundwork was laid meticulously, inching steadily toward the moment when their oversights would manifest in tangible challenges beyond mere rhetoric. At the close of this phase, the situation remained precarious for both sides. Karen's team pressed on with the staffing transition, while I fortified my position through formal channels and strategic communications. The next developments would hinge on how effectively their unprepared replacement could manage the system, and how regulators and clients would respond to the risks we had spotlighted. The professional chessboard was set, each move deliberate, each piece positioned for the emerging conflict. Within 2 weeks of my departure, the consequences of the rushed transition began to surface with alarming clarity. Mark Reynolds, the junior hire thrust into a role far beyond his experience, was overwhelmed by the complexity of the systems I had meticulously architected and maintained. His unfamiliarity with critical protocols led to a series of system outages that directly impacted client deliverables, something I had warned would happen without proper knowledge transfer and oversight. The first incident involved a critical backup failure during a routine maintenance window. Mark, lacking familiarity with the automated scripts I had developed for failover and data redundancy, manually intervened in the process and inadvertently triggered a cascade of errors. This resulted in partial data loss for one of our largest clients, a scenario that our service level agreements, SLAs, explicitly prohibited. The client's operations team escalated the issue immediately, prompting internal alarms and urgent calls to the company's IT leadership. Simultaneously, other clients began reporting intermittent access issues and unexplained downtime. These were traced back to misconfigured network routing protocols and firewall rules, areas I had consistently overseen and updated with precision. Mark's limited knowledge and inability to anticipate the ramifications of seemingly minor changes undermined system stability. The company's help desk was inundated with complaints, and the escalation queue swelled rapidly. From my vantage point outside the company, I monitored these developments closely. I maintained my professional composure, documenting every reported outage and correlating them with the timeline of Mark's onboarding and lack of formal training. This documentation was critical, not only to strengthen my ongoing legal and regulatory case, but to objectively demonstrate the operational risks I had previously highlighted. I compiled reports from client communications, internal incident tickets, and system logs were accessible through professional contacts. Each outage was noted with precise timestamps, descriptions, and impact assessments. Regulatory bodies soon took notice. The Ohio Department of Commerce's Division of Labor and Industrial Relations, having received our complaints, initiated formal inquiries into Cleveland Tech Solutions practices. Their investigators requested detailed documentation regarding the layoff procedures, severance practices, and knowledge transfer protocols. The company was put on notice that their operational governance and compliance standards were under scrutiny, an outcome I had anticipated and strategically pursued. During this period, Karen Mitchell's office began contacting me more frequently, though always through formal channels. She offered consulting fees to smooth the transition, a clear attempt to mitigate the growing fallout, and perhaps regain some control over the narrative. I declined all such offers, referring her to my legal counsel. This was a deliberate decision. Accepting consulting fees could have implied tacit agreement or weakened my position in ongoing disputes. Instead, I maintained all communications through my attorney, ensuring a consistent, unemotional, and legally sound posture. Meanwhile, colleagues within the company, aware of the mounting operational difficulties and the irregular circumstances surrounding my termination, began to voice their support discreetly. Several provided written statements attesting to the inadequacy of Mark's preparation and the company's failure to follow standard knowledge transfer procedures. These statements were carefully notarized and added to our dossier, reinforcing the credibility of our claims. Their corroboration also underscored the broader risks the company had incurred by sidelining experienced personnel without adequate safeguards. Throughout this escalating situation, I continued to document every interaction with professionalism. Emails, phone conversations, and meeting notes were logged meticulously, dates, times, participants, and subjects carefully recorded. This methodical approach ensured the integrity of the evidence trail, which was essential for both legal proceedings and regulatory reviews. It also conveyed a message of disciplined resolve, that I was not reacting emotionally, but responding with factual precision. As the company's operational challenges intensified, internal emails leaked, likely from concerned staff, revealing growing panic within management ranks. Discussions about the system outages highlighted the critical knowledge gaps left by my abrupt exit. These communications, preserved through secure channels, further evidenced the company's negligence and bolstered our case that the layoff had compromised system integrity. Despite all this, Karen pressed forward with Mark's onboarding, seemingly unaware or unwilling to acknowledge the full ramifications of her cost-cutting strategy. Her failure to anticipate the operational fallout and legal exposure was becoming increasingly evident. From my perspective, this miscalculation was a tactical advantage. The company's insistence on proceeding without addressing documented vulnerabilities was effectively setting a professional trap, one that formal complaints, client alerts, and regulatory scrutiny had begun to activate. This phase of mounting operational disruption and regulatory attention marked a turning point in the unfolding saga. While the company struggled to contain technical failures and reputational damage, I stood firm in strategic patience and professional discipline. The documented evidence of outages, client impacts, and non-compliance laid the groundwork for the next phase of legal and professional actions. The situation remained volatile, with Cleveland Tech Solutions facing escalating challenges that would soon demand critical decisions and concessions. As the weeks progressed, the situation escalated rapidly on multiple fronts, each development reinforcing the strength of the case Lisa and I had meticulously constructed. Simultaneously, formal legal action was initiated. Lisa filed a lawsuit on my behalf against Cleveland Tech Solutions, citing wrongful termination, breach of contract regarding severance and stock option entitlements, and improper enforcement of non-compete agreements. The complaint was detailed, referencing specific contractual clauses and Ohio employment statutes, and was supported by the exhaustive documentation we had amassed: employment contracts, termination notices, internal emails revealing premeditated intent, and technical documentation illustrating operational risks. This legal filing marked a pivotal turning point. It formally transformed what had begun as a personal and professional betrayal into a litigation matter, putting the company's management decisions under judicial scrutiny. The suit alleged that the company's actions not only violated my individual rights, but also exposed the firm to liabilities related to fiduciary duties and intellectual property protections embedded in my role. Concurrently, regulatory agents at the Ohio Department of Commerce intensified their investigations following the complaints we had submitted. Their inquiries expanded beyond procedural review of severance and employment classifications to include compliance with state labor laws governing layoffs, severance pay, and contractual fairness. Investigators requested comprehensive documentation from the company, including HR records, internal communications, and evidence of knowledge transfer protocols, or the lack thereof. These regulatory actions added a layer of external pressure that compounded the company's legal exposure, threatening fines and sanctions if violations were confirmed. Equally consequential were the ripples this upheaval sent through Cleveland Tech Solutions' client network. I proactively communicated with several key clients, primarily those for whom I had provided dedicated support over many years, alerting them in a factual, professional manner to the potential risks posed by the abrupt leadership change in IT systems administration and the lack of formal transition planning. These communications were carefully crafted to avoid disparagement, but emphasized the increased probability of service disruptions and compliance lapses, given the documented system dependencies and the new hires' limited expertise. The client responses were telling. Several major contracts were put under immediate review, with clients requesting detailed assurances from the company regarding contingency plans and system stability. A few clients even signaled that failure to address these concerns promptly could result in contract termination or reconsideration of future business arrangements. These developments struck at the core of Cleveland Tech Solutions' revenue streams and reputational standing, signaling to management that the ramifications of the layoff extended far beyond internal cost-cutting. Meanwhile, Karen Mitchell's office began to reach out with increasing frequency. Initially, the communications were tentative and indirect, but they quickly evolved into formal offers of consulting fees to smooth the transition and mitigate the fallout. These overtures were clearly attempts to quiet the situation by engaging me in a controlled advisory capacity. I declined all such offers unequivocally, instructing her and her team to direct all further communications to my legal counsel. This refusal was a deliberate strategic posture to avoid any implication of conditional cooperation or acceptance that could weaken our claims. Maintaining a professional distance and relying on legal representation ensured that all dialogue was documented and preserved within a formal framework. Within the company, the operational consequences of the ill-prepared transition became impossible to ignore. Mark Reynolds' ongoing struggles to manage the IT infrastructure resulted in escalating system outages, delayed client deliverables, and increased incident tickets. Internal emails leaked, likely through concerned employees, revealed growing panic among management and IT leadership. These communications disclosed fears that the knowledge gaps left by my abrupt departure were directly contributing to operational instability and client dissatisfaction. Colleagues who had supported my position provided sworn statements corroborating these operational challenges and attesting to the lack of adequate training and knowledge transfer. These testimonies were added to our case files, further solidifying the narrative that the company's reckless layoff approach had tangible deleterious effects on business continuity and fiduciary responsibility. Throughout this period, I maintained a posture of controlled professionalism. Every interaction with Cleveland Tech Solutions personnel was conducted with factual precision and without emotional reaction. I continued documenting all communications, compiling detailed logs of emails, phone calls, and meeting notes, including timestamps and participants. This rigorous record-keeping reinforced the integrity of our case and demonstrated my commitment to handling the situation with disciplined, unemotional professionalism. Collectively, these simultaneous developments, the filing of the lawsuit, regulatory intensification, client contract reviews, internal operational crises, and formal communications, created a multifaceted pressure cooker environment for Cleveland Tech Solutions. Karen Mitchell, who had once managed layoffs with apparent confidence, now found herself confronted with growing legal and regulatory scrutiny, operational failures, and client skepticism. Internal panic was evident, as reflected in leaked emails describing emergency meetings and contingency planning to address service disruptions and reputational damage. In response, Karen proposed settlement discussions, including potential reinstatement under altered terms. Her overture was conveyed through formal channels, carefully worded to gauge my willingness to resolve the matter without protracted legal conflict. I responded with measured professionalism, declining to engage directly and stating succinctly, "My lawyers will be in touch." This refusal was strategic, preserving negotiating leverage while signaling that any further engagement must proceed through formal legal frameworks. The overwhelming weight of documentation, expert testimonies, and regulatory pressures rendered the company's position untenable. Their internal assessments recognized the risk of continued litigation and regulatory penalties, as well as the operational instability stemming from ill-prepared staffing changes. The legal trap we had positioned was effectively sprung, shifting the power dynamic decisively. At this juncture, the professional battlefield was clearly defined. The combination of contractual breaches, regulatory non-compliance, and operational failures created a comprehensive case that Cleveland Tech Solutions could no longer ignore or contain through internal maneuvering alone. My methodical approach, anchored in documentation, legal counsel, and professional discipline, had transformed a sudden layoff into a scenario demanding accountability, remediation, and negotiation on terms favorable to restoring my professional rights and securing financial redress. The unfolding of these events set the stage for subsequent phases of resolution as the company grappled with the cascading consequences of its strategic miscalculations and the steadfastness of an employee who refused to be sidelined without contest. The details of the lawsuit, regulatory investigations, and client responses collectively underscored a critical lesson. In corporate conflicts rooted in professional expertise and contractual obligations, meticulous preparation and unemotional strategy are indispensable tools for justice and restoration. Karen Mitchell's downfall was as decisive as it was inevitable. The mounting evidence of her mishandling of the layoffs and fiduciary breaches proved impossible to ignore by the company's board of directors. After a series of internal reviews, prompted by the legal complaints, regulatory investigations, and the escalating operational failures, Karen was terminated for cause. The official statement cited gross negligence in the execution of workforce reductions and failure to uphold fiduciary responsibilities. Her professional reputation was irreparably damaged, effectively blacklisting her from leadership roles in the industry. This outcome was a direct result of her calculated yet reckless attempt to cut costs by sacrificing due process, contractual obligations, and operational integrity. Meanwhile, Cleveland Tech Solutions found itself embroiled in a growing legal and financial quagmire. Multiple wrongful termination lawsuits surfaced, not only from myself, but from other senior employees similarly blindsided by abrupt layoffs that disregarded contractual severance and benefit agreements. Collectively, these suits exposed a systematic pattern of ignoring employment laws and internal policies. The class action nature of some claims magnified the company's exposure, with potential damages mounting rapidly. Regulatory bodies, especially the Ohio Department of Commerce, levied fines totaling approximately $250,000 against Cleveland Tech Solutions for violations of state labor laws and failure to comply with mandated layoff notification procedures. These fines were accompanied by strict mandates to overhaul human resources protocols, establish transparent severance policies, and implement robust compliance training for management. The regulatory scrutiny also extended to the company's IT governance, with auditors highlighting the reckless manner in which essential system knowledge was allowed to lapse, endangering client data and service continuity. The reputational damage was profound. 3 major clients, whose contracts collectively accounted for nearly 30% of the company's annual revenue, terminated their agreements, citing loss of confidence in the company's operational stability and governance. These clients publicly disclosed their decisions in industry forums and press releases, further amplifying the fallout. The negative press coverage, including articles in leading IT trade publications, painted Cleveland Tech Solutions as a cautionary example of corporate mismanagement and short-sighted cost-cutting. This cascade of legal, regulatory, and client-driven consequences precipitated a profound internal reckoning. Additional wrongful termination claims emerged as affected employees stepped forward, emboldened by the publicized success of the initial legal challenges. The company's human resources department underwent a complete restructuring, with senior leadership replaced or reassigned, signaling a shift toward more compliant and transparent employment practices. Throughout this upheaval, Frank Donovan's expert technical assessments became pivotal. His reports, which were later submitted as part of formal proceedings, detailed how the abrupt layoff and the lack of knowledge transfer compromised critical infrastructure. His testimony underscored specific failures, system outages, security vulnerabilities, and regulatory compliance gaps that directly resulted from the company's mishandling of the transition. The public disclosure of these assessments furthered industry awareness about the operational risks inherent in improperly managed layoffs of senior technical staff. On a personal note, the professional upheaval coincided with intense personal challenges. The strain of protracted legal battles and financial uncertainty contributed to the dissolution of my marriage. Divorce proceedings were initiated, and while painful, the process resulted in an equitable division of assets that reflected my professional losses and anticipated recoveries. Legal counsel ensured that my financial interests were protected, including claims for lost income, severance pay, and damages related to company misconduct. The cumulative financial judgments awarded to me exceeded $350,000, encompassing unpaid severance, value of forfeited stock options, damages for wrongful termination, and compensation for emotional distress resulting from the company's actions. These awards were secured through a combination of negotiated settlements and court rulings, supported by the comprehensive documentation and legal strategy meticulously developed over months. Despite the turmoil, this phase affirmed the value of disciplined professionalism. The legal and financial victories were not derived from emotional retribution, but from methodical preparation, adherence to contractual rights, and strategic leverage of technical expertise. The dismantling of Karen's position and the company's legal and operational crises signaled a clear message. Recklessness in personnel management and fiduciary duties carries significant consequences. As this complex chapter unfolded, I remained focused on the broader professional landscape. The lessons learned shaped my ongoing approach to career resilience, contractual vigilance, and strategic response to corporate adversity. The experience underscored that while systemic betrayal can devastate, it also creates openings for accountability, reform, and eventual restoration of professional integrity. At this juncture, while the company grappled with the fallout and began implementing remedial actions, my own path was steadily redirecting toward rebuilding and advancing, with the support of legal judiciousness, technical credibility, and a renewed professional purpose. The situation remained dynamic, with ongoing implications for all parties involved and for the industry watching closely how this case would influence future corporate governance and employment practices. The culmination of the legal and regulatory battles finally produced tangible results, but the process was painstaking and required continued strategic patience. After months of diligent court filings, depositions, and regulatory hearings, the courts awarded me $325,000, an amount that comprehensively covered the severance pay owed, the value of my vested stock options, and additional damages for wrongful termination and contractual breaches. This sum was not merely a financial win, it was a formal acknowledgement of the company's failure to uphold their legal and ethical obligations. The court's ruling specifically referenced the deliberate misclassification of my termination status and the company's attempt to deny vested benefits. Their judgment underscored that Cleveland Tech Solutions had knowingly circumvented explicit contractual provisions designed to protect employees like me. The decision also highlighted the coercive tactics employed around the non-compete agreements and the lack of proper knowledge transfer protocols, which collectively contributed to operational risks and financial damages. This legal reaffirmation solidified my position not just as a wronged individual, but as a professional whose rights and contributions had been systematically undervalued and disregarded. Parallel to the court's decision, regulatory agencies intensified their enforcement actions. The Ohio Department of Commerce levied fines totaling approximately $250,000 against Cleveland Tech Solutions. These fines were tied to several violations: failure to comply with mandated severance payments, improper layoff notification procedures, and gross negligence in handling critical IT infrastructure transitions. The regulatory scrutiny forced the company to undertake a comprehensive restructuring of their human resources and compliance departments. New policies were mandated to ensure transparency in future layoffs, strict adherence to contractual severance clauses, and formalized transition plans for key technical staff. This regulatory intervention sent a clear message not only to the company, but to the broader industry. Shortcuts in employment law and governance invite severe consequences. Karen Mitchell's professional downfall was swift and unequivocal. Once a respected HR director, she was terminated by the company's board following an internal investigation that confirmed her mishandling of the layoffs and breaches of fiduciary duty. The official statement cited gross negligence and failure to uphold ethical standards in workforce management. Beyond losing her position, Karen was effectively blacklisted within the industry, her reputation tarnished by the public nature of the legal battles and the documented failures under her leadership. This personal accountability underscored the risks inherent in executing cost-cutting measures without due diligence or respect for contractual and operational realities. The fallout extended well beyond individual personnel changes. Cleveland Tech Solutions suffered significant reputational damage. 3 major clients, whose contracts collectively represented nearly 30% of annual revenue, severed ties citing systemic operational failures and loss of confidence in governance. These clients issued formal statements emphasizing their need for stable, compliant partners, underscoring how the company's internal mismanagement had direct external consequences. Industry publications and IT trade journals picked up the story, portraying the company as a cautionary example of how reckless cost-cutting and negligent personnel practices can undermine even well-established firms. Additional wrongful termination claims surfaced from other senior employees similarly blindsided by abrupt layoffs. The cumulative legal exposure compounded Cleveland Tech Solutions' difficulties, prompting a wave of internal reforms. Human resources underwent a complete overhaul, with new leadership brought in to rebuild trust and ensure compliance with labor laws and contractual obligations. The company also implemented stringent controls over knowledge transfer and documentation, recognizing the critical operational risks highlighted by Frank Donovan's technical assessments. Frank's expert testimony played a pivotal role throughout these proceedings. His detailed reports on system outages, security vulnerabilities, and compliance lapses resulting from my abrupt departure provided an authoritative technical foundation to the legal arguments. His credibility as a retired consultant with decades of experience lent weight to the case and informed regulatory actions. The public disclosure of his assessments further elevated industry awareness, sparking broader discussions on the importance of safeguarding institutional knowledge during workforce transitions. On a personal front, the extended ordeal exerted significant strain. The uncertainty, financial pressures, and emotional toll contributed to the dissolution of my marriage. Divorce proceedings were conducted with legal counsel ensuring equitable division of assets, reflecting the professional losses and anticipated recoveries related to the case. While painful, this process resulted in a fair settlement, providing a stable foundation for the next chapter of my life. Ultimately, the financial judgments and settlements awarded to me exceeded $350,000, encompassing unpaid severance, the fair market value of forfeited stock options, damages for wrongful termination, and compensation for emotional distress related to the company's conduct. These outcomes were achieved not through emotional confrontation, but through rigorous preparation, strategic legal action, and professional discipline. This phase underscored a critical truth. In complex professional disputes, careful documentation and unemotional methodical response are indispensable. The dismantling of Karen's position, the company's regulatory penalties, and the loss of key clients demonstrated that corporate mismanagement carries real and lasting professional consequences. More importantly, these events underscored the value of standing firm on contractual rights and leveraging technical expertise as tools for justice and restoration. As Cleveland Tech Solutions grappled with these cascading challenges, their internal restructuring and compliance reforms signaled a recognition of past mistakes. Meanwhile, I found myself positioned to rebuild professionally, armed with hard-won lessons and validated by the justice system's acknowledgement of my claims. The situation remained dynamic, with the company's recovery uncertain and my own path increasingly focused on advancement and resilience. Now settled into my new role leading system architecture at a top-tier technology firm, I earn $168,000 annually and hold equity participation that aligns my interests with the company's long-term success. This position not only reflects a salary increase, but also offers a stake in the organization's growth, recognition of my professional value, and the strategic patience I exercised throughout the ordeal. Having navigated the complexities of wrongful termination, contractual breaches, and operational risks, I find myself in a position to reflect deeply on the lessons that emerged from this challenging chapter. Foremost among these lessons is the indispensable value of rigorous documentation. Throughout my career, and especially during the crisis, I realized that detailed, methodical record-keeping is not merely bureaucratic overhead, but a fundamental professional safeguard. Every system diagram, every email exchange, every contractual clause meticulously archived became a critical asset in asserting my rights and maintaining control over an adverse situation. It reinforced my belief that a professional's best defense lies in an unbroken chain of evidence, preserved with integrity and precision. Documentation transforms subjective disputes into objective facts, enabling measured responses instead of reactive emotions. Closely tied to this is the vital importance of fully understanding legal clauses embedded within employment agreements. Non-compete provisions, severance eligibility, stock option plans. These are not abstract terms but powerful instruments that define protections and limitations. I learned that knowing these contractual details intimately allows one to identify leverage points and recognize when corporate maneuvers cross legal boundaries. Karen Mitchell's attempt to enforce a new non-compete under duress, without honoring severance, was a strategic error that I was prepared to exploit only because I grasped the legal nuances underpinning my employment contract. This knowledge transformed vulnerability into tactical advantage. Furthermore, the experience reaffirmed the superiority of strategic patience over impulsive reaction. When blindsided by the layoff, my initial response was grounded not in anger or desperation, but in a calm, systematic assessment of facts. This approach demanded discipline, resisting the urge to respond emotionally, instead focusing on gathering evidence, consulting experts, and planning deliberate actions. It was a slow, incremental process, but one that ultimately dismantled the company's position and secured justice. Patience enabled me to build an unassailable professional case, rather than risking damage through rash decisions. The encounter with that old man at the diner, whose words, "You look like Michael, my son," briefly lifted me from despair, remains a poignant reminder of the unexpected human connections that can arise during difficult times. While unrelated to the professional battle, that moment instilled in me a renewed sense of purpose and perspective. It underscored that beyond contracts and systems, our careers intersect with personal stories and broader human networks, which can offer unexpected support and insight. Reflecting on justice, I am convinced that it is not about vengeance, but about restoring order and dignity through systematic, lawful means. The legal victories, regulatory fines, and corporate consequences were not acts of retaliation but outcomes of a reasoned, evidence-based process that held the company accountable for its fiduciary lapses and contractual breaches. This restoration of professional dignity was crucial not only for my own well-being, but also for setting an industry precedent emphasizing respect for employee rights and technical stewardship. Today, as I lead complex system architecture projects, I carry these lessons forward, not only in how I document and design, but also in how I navigate professional relationships and contractual commitments. The ordeal has made me more vigilant and empowered, reinforcing that knowledge is power and discipline is strength. I am respected by my peers and valued by my employer, not merely for technical skill, but for the integrity and resilience shaped by this experience. Looking ahead, I remain ready for the next challenge, confident that steadfast professionalism, comprehensive preparation, and strategic patience will continue to guide my career forward. The path has been arduous, but the journey has forged a stronger, wiser professional, one who understands that success is built not just on expertise, but on the firm foundation of documentation, legal awareness, and measured resolve. The 5 words spoken by a stranger on a difficult night serve as a lasting symbol. Even when everything seems lost, there is potential for renewal, connection, and purposeful advancement.